stand here a little bit shocked, if I can say that, by Miss Priya Manichan's presentation. Is this better? Great. I stand here a little bit shocked by Miss Priya Manichan's opening statement in her presentation. Sir, I am shocked because she took the time to explain that there's a young person that was looking at the debates and they could not believe, the chaos. They're horrified. Sir, I remember being one of those horrified persons looking on at the performance of Miss Manichan in the National Assembly. Sir, it was the very member that stood in the National Assembly screaming, rape, rape, rape. Sir, why did she not know of the sensitivity of that matter back then that she come to preach to us about here today?
Honorable.
There is no, that is absolutely untrue. The honorable member knows that is absolutely untrue.
Honorable Minister, Honorable Minister.
This is a serious
Honorable
issue,
Minister.
sir.
Honorable,
sir, I'm willing to present the video to this honorable house,
and,
sir.
And I would ask the honorable member to lay it over in this house. Let's put this matter to rest.
Honorable members.
Put this matter to rest. It's an important matter. Rape is not something we play with, sir. Let's put this matter to rest.
Honorable members, there is a reason why we have standing orders. The standing order says that when the speaker is speaking, that there must be silence in the house. If there's an issue that comes to the floor, it is to be addressed in line with the standing orders that are published. I'm sure everyone has had a copy of that. Honorable Fernandes, I will say that the standing orders also dictate that every member of parliament in this house is an honorable member. And I think that the speaker also circulated, if I'm not mistaken, yesterday, on words that one may not use that are unparliamentary. Please be guided by those. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Noted. To continue, sir, to address something said by the honorable member, Ms. Manichan. The honorable member, Ms. Manichan, stood there and tried to lecture to us, to tell us what is equity. And in her explanation of equity, sir, she actually explained what is equality. There is a vast difference between equity and equality. And you cannot misconstrue those concepts, sir. They are very dense economic concepts that have heavy meaning. The honorable member actually explained equity as giving everybody textbooks. That's equality, honorable member, Minister of Education. Sir, equity would be in the distribution of textbook if you give textbooks to the poorest families first, to the poorest communities first, because they are the most vulnerable in society and they need it the most, sir. Sir, and just in case the honorable member needs an avenue to test whether or not her policies are being effective, sir, equality and equity, sir, in order for you to actually measure if your policies, particularly the resources that you inject into the system, is being done in an equitable manner, you should be getting equal outcome. So unless every part of Guyana is actually given and having the equal outcome in the education sector, then the Honorable Minister of Education need not stand here and attempt to lecture us on concepts that she is yet to perfect. Sir, I will head into my presentation now. Guyana has entered a period of profound power, financial power, in the hands of central government. And because of this, rightfully so, Guyanese are demanding more today than they ever did before. Significant improvement in healthcare, higher standard of living, highest quality of education, a living wage, and dignified housing. Those things are no longer things our people hope for. These are things that they now demand, and rightfully so, Mr. Speaker. With Guyana's population of about 750,000 as of the last census, I don't know where the next one is, the government is now tabling a budget of $781.9 billion. So that amounts to 1.04 million per Guyanese and 3.72 million per Guyanese family. Mr. Speaker, the budget accounts for every Guyanese family $310,000. This is the reality that we are facing with here today in this House. It is therefore only natural for the people to expect that this budget will include provisions that would immediately end things like childhood hunger. It is natural to expect provisions that would make costs no longer a hindrance for persons achieving a higher education. It is natural to expect that in this budget, there should be provisions that provide emergency housing for the thousands of Guyanese families who suffer the indignity of living in squalors of many squatting areas and has nowhere else to go, sir. By such, sir, it is natural. Sir, as natural as these expectations may be, you can search near and far in Budget 2023 as presented by Honorable Ashni Singh, and you will not find any policy measure that is addressing those needs in 2023 budget, sir. Instead, in oil-rich Guyana, Guyanese are struggling to feed their families, giving up on their hopes of attending university and praying that the PPP don't target their homes, some built in squatting areas, for the next level of destruction, sir. Guyanese are forced to go through another year without living in dignity and living in the indignities of poverty in this country, sir, with a budget of $781.9 billion being tabled in this House for us, sir. $310,000 per family, sir. Imagine what that would have done for the families who worry where their next meal is coming from. Mr. Speaker, the PPP comes to this House and boasts about the current GDP. Sir, it is such necessary that we put the PPP's 3 years into perspective, sir. The non-oil GDP growth rate recorded over the last three years of the PPP rule is 2.6%. 2.6%, sir. Sir, and Mr. Small IQ over there trying to heckle, sir, his basic understanding of mathematics is stuck at the level of 2 1s 2, 2 into 2, 1. So, sir, you need to take a seat and listen. No, sir, I know the Honorable Minister Singh last year said, and I'm paraphrasing here, every little child with a pocket calculator would get a different answer. And perhaps, sir, the PPP has given a glimpse into their approach of conducting mathematical analysis necessary for making major economic decisions in this country. Children with pocket calculators. That would actually explain a lot, sir. However, Mr. Speaker, I am confident that the Honorable Minister Singh that sought to make that correction, Dr. Singh, for that matter, is able to recognize that when a mathematical problem is that of an exponential nature and not simply A plus B divided by C, sir. So I am confident that he was guided wrong. Mr. Speaker, the PPP's 2.6% growth rate was achieved by emptying the natural resource fund of every cent it contained at the start of 2022. Furthermore, sir, in spite of the last 3 years being the only period of oil production in Guyana's history, in spite of the PPP's borrowings, in 3 years, sir, more money than the combined total of the oil revenues Guyana received in the same period, the PPP's average yearly growth rate still falls short of the GDP that the APNU AFC achieved, sir. In the first 3 years, that is, of the APNU AFC being in office. Mr. Speaker, the PPP spent $314 billion more in 2022 than the APNU AFC spent in 2019. This represents an increase of 104.5% in government spending, and yet, sir, they delivered only 2.6 GDP rate over the last 3 years, sir. Mr. Speaker, the extent of the PPP's failure is even more profound when you consider the fact that the PPP increased government spending over 23% of non-oil GDP, sir. Now, the Lord members listening here today, I don't want to say on the opposite side, sir, anyone would understand that if you increase government spending by more than 23% more than the non-oil GDP, and you are receiving less, a lower GDP, sir, than that 23%, it simply means that other aspects, other sections of the economy is actually declining. But, sir, guess what? Now we are to ask what sections are declining, sir? What part of the economy shrank? Was it the investment? Was it consumption? We are left to wonder whether Guyanese are starting fewer businesses or eating less food, sir. This is what the information presented by the Honorable Minister of Finance shows. Thankfully, sir, we have international organizations to help us answer all of those questions. Sir, I refer to polls published by the IRI, the International Republican Institute, that shows 22% of Guyanese struggling to feed themselves and their families. 57% of Guyanese don't have money for anything but survival, sir. These are the facts we're looking at. This is the PPP's governance. And, sir, as damning as the actual data is, if you come to the actual budget that was presented in this House, the Honorable Minister of Finance actually stated that the non-oil GDP growth for 2022 was 11.5%. Sir, but then he lowered his voice a little bit when he came to the targets for 2023, sir, because in the projection that he's putting forward for the growth of the non-oil GDP, he is now saying that unlike the 11.5% that happened in 2022, in 2023, he is projecting 7.9%, sir. The Honorable Minister of Finance came to this House and presenting a budget of $781.9 billion, and yet he is telling us that the non-oil economy will be growing at a slower rate than it did last year. Brace yourself, people. That's what he's saying effectively. Sir, the PPP, my God. Already struggling Guyanese were then faced with skyrocketing inflation. They don't want us to talk about this. Inflation that affected the poorest and most vulnerable members of society the most. Because while general inflation totaled a whopping 13.7% in the PPP's 3 years, food prices have been seeing the worst when it comes to price hikes, sir. Inflated 30% under the PPP's regime, according to the Bureau of Statistics, sir. Sir, that means if you have a family that actually budget, if your family was large enough that you actually had to budget $100,000 for food per month, now you have to budget $130,000 more for food per month. Where does these poor families, the most vulnerable in society, get this additional $30,000 to feed themselves? We're talking about the food prices here, sir. Under these conditions, it should be no surprise that the 22% of Guyanese find it difficult to feed themselves and their families, sir. Now we see more evidence in this budget that the PPP intends to continue their policy of monetary expansion with a callous lack of concern for the suffering it is causing and the countless children who are going hungry with their inflationary policy measures, sir. With no changes in the monetary expansion policy and with a clear stated intention to drastically increase the money supply and the domestic market by importing massive amounts of money and currency held at the Natural Resource Fund, by continuing their borrowing spree that we're talking about also, by lowering the interest rate and by the reduced reserve requirement at the commercial bank, among other measures, sir, the PPP still comes to this honorable house with a projection of 3.8% inflation for 2023, sir. Less than the 4.1% that the Honorable Minister Ashley Singh stood in this house last year and projected. For persons who can't remember, he stood in this house last year and he said that the target for 2022's inflation rate would be 4.1%. He was forced to come back here, sir, and to say that the actual inflation was 7.2%. But, sir, even with less data than he has, I predicted, whilst he predicted 4.1, I predicted 8%, sir, with less data than he had. Sir, expansionist monetary policies are inflationary by nature. That is such a difficulty, apparently, for the PPP to understand. Mr. Speaker, the PPP wants to hope that inflation will reduce in spite of them taking no action to achieve projected reduction. Instead, they blame the international market for the inflation caused by the monetary policy that they have in place. When at the same time, sir, they themselves are saying, and the Honorable Minister Singh would have said in his presentation also, that the inflation is caused by the food price increase. Locally grown foods are what we are facing the hiking prices with. So when the Honorable Minister Kwame McCoy came to this house yesterday and brought the sugar and the oil that he took out of the hampers that they take and give to people and say that he got it from Mocha, he can't bring that nonsense to us because the people on the ground are facing the hardship and the difficulties, sir. Sir, the Honorable Minister Ashley Singh stood and presented a budget that stated that the external debt was at 1.6 billion US dollars and the internal debt 2.1 billion US dollars, totaling 3.7 billion US dollars, sir. Given the increased debt per household for 2023 is in excess, sir, of $530,000, sir. This is a reality that Guyanese are facing today. With a budget, sir, of $781.9 billion, the debt burden that is being added to Guyanese shoulders is actually over $500,000 per household. These are the realities that the PPP is bringing to us. Sir, to further elaborate on the domestic debt, the Honorable Ashley Singh went on to say, sir, and I quote, "The growth of domestic debt service payments was in turn largely due to the commencement of principal repayments on debentures issued in 2021 to securitize an inherited overdraft at the central bank." Mr. Speaker, this information is false information deliberately spread to deceive people. That, Mr. Speaker, is disinformation. Mr. Speaker, it was the very Ashley Singh, honorable member, that stood in this house and said that as of August the 2nd, 2020, when the PPP took office, the overdraft was $78.7 billion, sir. And after 4 months of the PPP being in office in 2020, at the end of 2020, the overdraft was $100.6 billion, sir. $37.9 billion in a few months, and they come to talk to us. But that wasn't all, sir. Because just 6 months after that, in June of 2021, The government sold over $200 billion in debentures to clear off the overdraft. They racked up, sir, in less than 1 year. They racked up more than double the overdraft that they inherited from the APNU AFC administration on the 2nd of August 2020. So how dare they come to this house and speak about inherited overdraft? That, sir, is disinformation, and we will not stand for it. Mr. Speaker, the opening speaker on the government side, Joe Hamilton, honorable member, though he's not in the house right now, spoke of opposing and proposing as an opposition, completely neglected or pretending not to hear the numerous recommendations that continues to be pushed forward by members of the opposition. But, sir, let's turn our attention to wages and salaries. Sir, it was in 2016, when the honorable members of the government side, senior members of the PPP administration, stood in the National Assembly and demanded that wages and salaries be increased by 50%. That was them in opposition, sir. That was them proposing as an opposition. That is how they understood it. Sir, back in 2016, the budget was $230 billion. They said public servants should get 50% salary increases. Today, with a budget of $781.9 billion, PPP have absolutely no plan on increasing wages and salaries, not even by 15%, sir. There's absolutely no allocation that is going to provide for that. They talk about line item 6141. There is no allocation that is going to significantly increase wages and salaries for public servants in this country. They suddenly get amnesia when it comes to what you should propose as an opposition, sir. That insult to injury, sir. This one I take personal offense to. The public service minister, oh, she's not in the house right now. I'll speak nevertheless, sir. The public service minister stood in this house yesterday and boldly said that although Ashni Singh, honorable member, spoke in 2022 budget presentations about revising the public service salary scale, it was not until the end of the year that they actually began the process. This is the priority that they actually put on the public servants when it comes to wages and salaries, sir. Mr. Speaker, the PPP has no excuse for not significantly raising wages and salaries for public servants. And, sir, I will call them out for having the audacity to tell public servants in this country, because they have been doing this, that the reason why they're not increasing their wages and salaries, sir, is because if you increase more wages and salaries, you're going to put more money out into the economy and it's going to cause inflation, sir. How dare them stand before the people of this country and say that they're going to inject $781.9 billion into the economy. Oh, but if you give poor people money, a little bit more, you can cause inflation. So giving rich people money don't cause inflation too, sir? That's what they want to tell the people of this country. What economic policy are they looking at, sir? In 2016, with a budget of $230 billion, the APNU AFC government gave 10% to the lowest earners in our country, sir. In 2022, with a budget of $552.9 billion, the PPP came and gave the people 8%, sir. And now, sir, in 2023, with a budget of $781.9 billion, we are yet to hear of salary increases for wages and salaries in this country for public servants. They have absolutely no interest in committing and honoring any one of those pledges they made, because it was political gimmicks. And the people of this country, understand the same way they to date, they have no plan on doing it. They know the truth, but they continue to come here and be willfully deceitful for need of the right word. Sir, as we talk about this budget, Mr. Speaker, The PPP continues to take to the media with disinformation, and their most recent attempt to address unemployment, I think, is one of the most sickening attempts that I've heard thus far. Mr. Speaker, I could not believe my ears when I heard senior members of the government saying, and I quote, today, Guyana today rather, if you don't have a job, is because you don't want one. And to add insult to injury, sir, they are, and if you need proof, sir, I'm willing to take the video evidence and present it to this house. And to add insult to injury, sir, they are now saying that if you don't have a job, it's because you're lazy. I have heard them say this. And sir, those statements are not only disrespectful to the Guyanese people, sir, those statements are blatant bypass, as we would say out on the street. To the thousands of university graduates that's still in search of a job. And Mr. Speaker, I think that it would appear that senior members of government do not understand the concept of unemployment and how it's computed. Sir, because if they did know that, they would know that in order for you to be counted as unemployed, you would have to be actively looking for a job and being unable to find one. So to go out there and to say that persons that are unemployed are lazy or they don't want a job, disrespectful to the highest, sir, and I will not stand for it in this house, sir. Sir, according to the data produced by the Bureau of Statistics, youth unemployment was at 31.9%. Sir, and the overall unemployment was at 14.5%, sir. So, and I have to say at this point that this data is actually coming from the third quarter report of the Labor Force Survey of 2021. And I will call the PPP out also on holding back data, hiding information from this country, sir. We are yet to receive the fourth quarter report for the labor service, for the labor survey in this country, and we had absolutely no report being published in the entire year of 2022 because they do not want those facts being addressed by the public, sir, because when those reports are published, we go through it page for page, line for line, sir, and they need to do better than that. Mr. Speaker, those numbers simply say that over 42,000 persons were unemployed as of the third quarter of 2021. 20,000 plus of those being young people, sir. So how dare the PPP come to this house and say that in Guyana don't want that one. Y'all forget about your degree in about that going through to sense the policy us in this house. Unemployment is to parade around this country and register persons for a part-time job. It reeks of full mismanagement in the system. Already are employed and now collecting a double when it comes to once again breadline. Unemployment in Guyana is real. University graduates are looking for jobs and find. Graduates from technical institutes are looking for jobs and can't find. Youth trained government programs. This are A lot of them went through programs that he presides over as assessor. And what are we to say of the brilliant in this budget to actually for our country in this budget? Mr. Speaker, Assembly and budget without addressing poverty, sir. Poverty. Remember you that Indar yesterday. Sir, Mr. Indar stood in this house and presented to this nation a criticism of the APN UAFC administration. He criticized spending capital for entails. Let me tell you. It includes things like old. It includes things like public assistance. Every bit of people-centered policy comes under current capital, and we will not apologize for spending money on the people of this country, sir. We are proud, and we would do it again. And so, that the honorable member may expenditures, sir. It was the PPP for 2020 elections, travel the length and breadth of this country. And you know what? Road. Each road. And that all they were spending much on some is they have to pick a struggle and miss and this attention to these points. Today, 181.9 billion. And the most minute allocation society, sir. While draining the PPP house, sir. And all they can rape up is a 5,000 increase for pension. It's 3,000 increase under this administration.
Honourable member, I would say that in order to conclude, you would need a 5 minutes extension.
Comment speaker. It's to conclude.
The interruptions that
Thank you, sir. And sir, Mr. Speaker, President with responsibility for finance stood in the House last Monday and proposed that a low-income mortgage ceiling will be. Sir, of families living in the country. Government policy way. And although such policy proposal may sound attractive to low-income earners, after all, that's what it is, low-income earners, low-income mortgage. Sir, we need to deal with the reality of the proposal. It is only fair that we are honest to the people of this country. Mr. Speaker, a 20 million mortgage taken at a commercial bank for the period of 10 years with an interest rate of 5.95, we're using the Republic Bank rate here, sir, will require monthly payments of $142,000 per month. And sir, if you are to apply the 30% principle, sir, that $142,000 will need to cover 30% of someone's income. Someone would need to be making over $400,000 to access that 20% mortgage, sir. This is the reality of what you're speaking about. Mr. Speaker, the low-income mortgage ceiling of $20 million is not for low-income earners. And the PPP knows this. That is why when you look at the size of the low-income turnkey houses that they're building, it will not reflect the quality of a $20 million home, sir. These are the realities that we are looking at today. And I have to say, low-income earners today are still left to see where actually they're going to be getting the policy measures that is going to aid them in constructing their home, sir. For 3 years now, sir, we have come to this house and tried our best to get the fact through to our colleagues on the other side. The PPP to governance lacks humanity, and this is something that was very visible only a short while ago in Mokasor. The budget treats Guyana economy as though it is a small collection of large businesses, and we cannot continue like that, sir. In the words of the Indian economist, Amartya Sen, he says, economic growth without investment in human development is unsustainable. It's unethical. It is unsustainable, sir, and it is unethical. It's unsustainable because of the simple fact that an economy is made up of collective efforts and accomplishments of people, hard-working Guyanese, and not a few large businesses, sir. It is the wealth of the people in the economy, not the wealth of the economy that they are in, sir. That must be the primary concern of any reasonable and responsible government. What's their current level of education? What's their health care? What's their diet like? And are Guyanese afforded the opportunity to turn their dreams into reality, sir? These are the questions that would be on the front burner of any responsible governance, sir. In closing, sir, Guyana under the PPP is a place where 57% of our population doesn't have money for anything but survival. Guyana under the PPP is a place where 22% of Guyanese find it difficult to feed themselves and families. Guyana under the PPP is a place where higher education is still out of the reach of the poorest families. All this while the PPP continues to boast of having the fastest growing economy in the world. As predictable as the PPP's failure may have been, sir, it is still profoundly depressing that we will enter our fourth year as an oil-producing nation with no real improvement in the lives and the standard of living of the majority of Guyanese families,
Mr. Speaker,
who will continue to suffer the indignities of poverty in this country, sir. Sir, we can do much better as a people, and I will urge the PPP administration to go back and take a look at the budget that they are presenting to us and take a page out of the book of AP and UAFC and actually spend more on current expenditure and the most vulnerable in society. Sir, this is the only way that we should be able to boast about being the fastest growing economy in the world. I thank you.
The monies from that project. And Guyana, as a result of especially that petroleum agreement, is today, per capita, one can say, probably the richest country in the Americas. And it is very important, too, that we understand the multiplier effect of that project, namely all the businesses, all the other operators, and so many other nuclear impacts, as it were, from that one sector that today now brings in so much money. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, when I heard some of the government benches yesterday talking and trying to do comparisons with what we did as a coalition government, I want to indicate that that is rather unfair, if not dubious, because of the fact that the revenue streams today is far superior from anything we ever had. And that is why, although it was called a rotten agreement, and in the recent newspaper I see the S word being used by a former vice president, by the existing vice president, we feel that we must not compare the two. Yesterday, Mr. Ganesh and Mr. Chris, honorable members on this side, explained what we did, especially in sports and culture and in local government, to show that with the little that we have, then what we did. And so this kind of analysis whereby the PPP would want to say that we ain't do nothing, we ain't do one thing, it must be understood. We have to now make sure that the comparisons are comparable, as it were. Mr. Speaker, we must not compare this context with what happened before. What we must insist on, is a comparison as to what is being done now with that large revenue stream by the PPP as against what ought to be done. And that is why in this budget, just before it, we had indicated that we would like to have some halves in relation to what this budget must state. And yesterday, my good friend, Mr. Joe Hamilton, was giving the impression that we do not propose anything. We do not propose anything. Well, I want to say that we did propose a number of things in a release called Budget 2023 Must-Haves. And we indicate that we wanted an increase in the minimum wage of $150,000 with corresponding adjustments to personal income tax. We proposed an increase in old age pension to $50,000. We proposed an increase in disability benefits to $40,000. We proposed a reduction of VAT to 12%. And we also proposed that new shelters around the administrative regions for women being abused these shelters would support the victims of domestic violence, along with the two others that was mentioned by Joe. Mr. Speaker, we understand that in every budget cycle, you're going to have more and more now being spent. But it is not good enough to say that we have done this and exclude us from what ought to be done. And in the context of a Guyana in which, as the Kaichur News mentioned, 43% of Guyanese can't afford a healthy diet, 5% undernourished, and this is an FAO report. It happens today, and you can argue whatever you want, but the whole point of it is that it is not intellectual dishonesty. Look at them. We are saying that it is important to understand, even Mr. Speaker, this is why, you know, the give and take in a normal democracy is absent with that kind of attitude.
Remember, the give and take in the House, though, is when you are going to quote the report and lay over for us, and quote the source.
That is an important editorial as to our cost of living. Everything has gone up. Everything. I'm not being intellectually dishonest here. The Starbrook News in an editorial indicated, please don't get so fired up, Mr. Finance Minister. Don't get so fired up. I am saying that in today's context, we are having a hard time. And that hard time is as a result of the tremendously high cost of living. And in that reality, we must ensure that we do the comparatives as to what we could do now with the oil and gas and credit carbons revenue stream as against what we are doing. And there is every righteousness about that. You have you have at least the attitude of indicating that we must not go there. Well, I am going to go there. Mr. Speaker, it is very important then that we do an analysis as to why it is not being done. The analysis is simple. This is a working class supposed government. It forgot about all of that a good time now. And it is going on and on in relation to what is called certain schemes, very clever, in which a certain set of people in Guyana are going to be the beneficiaries. I want to indicate, Mr. Speaker, when you have the construction industry having so much money poured into it, when you have so much money being poured into the construction, rule of thumb, it is a certain set of contractors who are friends and family will always be the beneficiaries. Construction industry is going to Mr. Speaker, the heckling started very early this morning. But I am telling you that the construction industry is one of the epicenters of corruption. I will lay over the report of Transparency International 2005, which indicated that that is especially happening with oil resource countries. Some bites. I'm glad that it's actually biting you. Mr. Speaker, it has all the ingredients conducive for corruption. There are so many uncertainties in the execution that it is possible to draw what it is impossible to draw what so many economists refer to as the complete contract. You can't get a complete contract, let's say, for that harbor bridge as to what and what it will be at the cost. You cannot have, for some of the roads in Guyana, you cannot have a complete contract as to what it will cost. And that is why so many roads are being built, the next day, literally, they're breaking and apart. And you know what the corruption, especially in that construction industry, does? It creates what is called an undermining of the political process. And it enables patronage to triumph over honest politics. Mr. Speaker, we know very well that as against what we have as infrastructural spendings in Guyana, a little bit of that could have been nudged away and at least be given to the working people so that the working people can have a better day than not having to literally get malnourished. Mr. Speaker, I am happy that I have gotten up the bile of the Minister of Finance. It means that I am making a good point. Mr. Speaker, it is all there. It is all there. And we're going to come to what is happening now. The EPA, the EITI, all of those institutions are also today, as a result, being subverted because of what we have under the corruption and the patronage that is happening in Guyana. These transformational projects, as they call them, as Comrade Siraj yesterday talked about, and I regard Mr. Siraj as a typical PPP person, but he also made some dubious comments. Here, this is what is being said by him. The PPP is not thinking about votes. That is why we are having big transformational projects. Listen to me, Mr. Leaders, people over there. That PPP leadership always think about that and nothing else. It's a well-oiled political machinery. Whenever it makes any decision, it thinks about the votes. And I know about that. That is the leadership. It is the reason why, and it is the reason why they seek to dodge today, Mr. Speaker, a strong EPA and also a strong EITI. This resource-rich country today is having what is called elections without good governance. They prefer elections only, as if elections is what is democracy. Elections is not democracy, Mr. Speaker. Elections is one component, and they're there now. And they had an inheritance and a largesse that is the greatest ever. And that is why I said, your inheritance that you have been devised, the inheritance that you have been devised is that which is so humongous. But you got to know better, Mr. Ashley Singh, honorable member, as to how you're going to spend that money. Don't ever say that these projects might be transformational. I remember when they said that the Skeldon Sugar Factory will be transformational. Where is the Skeldon Sugar Factory today? Fiber optic cable, FIP Motilal's road, all of that. You must understand that it is not because you deem it transformational. What was transformational, however, is when we signed that agreement that it could make you $200 billion today to spend in this budget. What was transformational was the right sizing of the sugar industry so that you don't pour good money behind bad sectors and billions of dollars.
Honorable member, I just want to caution you. Remember, you're speaking with the speaker. So when you say you must, you're admonishing the speaker to do something. If you want to refer to the other side, the honorable members over there, right? Because I take some of these things personally.
It is not a budget that I can support. There is no planning, there is no targeting, there is no outputs. The budget is pathetically policy poor. A PPP. Pathetically policy poor. Yes, they love to say that it is the biggest budget, but I want to say, as Mr. Christopher Ram has indicated in his analysis, it is also with the biggest deficit. Biggest budget with the biggest deficit. Mr. Speaker, we have taken some severe body blows of recent times. Severe body blows. I mean, you have Mr. Kwame McCoy, he was very slippery yesterday, and he walked with the own aisle. And it's the wrong size bottle you walk with too. Mr. Speaker, we have to understand that because of that no planning, no outputs, no targeting, policy poor budget, that is why the cost of living has gone so high. That is why effectively, compared to what the salaries and wages are, why it is that the people can't find what is called, better conditions or standard of living. It is because we could have done, notwithstanding what might be the economic reasons for inflation, we could have neutralized or neutered those with at least better incomes. Tell us how? And it is instead of spending so much on infrastructure, you could have given 5% more for the people of this country. How much you spending on workers? Yes, you could have even given 10% more. And you are stating today that we could not. Mr. Speaker, we did not have that revenue stream that is like a gold stream today. We don't have it, and that is why it is important. You don't deal with poverty by cash transfers like that. What is the output of $40,000 for 10-day work? You're just going to buy the votes. That is all you know about, buying the votes over there. Mr. Speaker, it is important. You are there. I don't know about votes being stolen. If it is any votes. Mr. Speaker, those are some of the preliminary points I wish to make in relation to this budget. And I think I have been rather impactful, don't you think? Today, the cost of living, as I wanted to make this point, cost of living is so much. Everything up. Even when you go to the market and you see fish, ginger, dal, rice, everything gone up. And these people are saying with a humongous revenue stream that they can't do better. Show me now, show me. That is their contrived histrionics. That's their contrived theatrics. Just like what Slippery Kwame said yesterday.
Okay, honorable member, Mr. Ramjet, and you know better. You're in here longer than I am. You know, I just want to. I don't like to interrupt people of my cohort, so I allowed you 10 times to use corruption. during the speech, right? And I've asked you to deal with, you either say Comrade Kwame, regardless of reference to his oil, or honorable member, Kwame McCoy.
To spend so much money on sugar is pouring good money behind bad, Mr. Finance Minister. Mr. We have spent, prior to this budget, approximately $13 billion. We are today going to spend another $4 billion behind sugar. They have been advertising for jobs at Rosal, and people are not coming. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, we gave them their severance benefits. If it is going to drag an economy down, we had to make the correct decision. That was transformational. Mr. Speaker, we repeat and maintain that the false explanations and narrative being given by the government, the Minister of Agriculture and CEO of Gaisuko are all ill-advised and is a road to nowhere. Mr. Speaker, the evidence is clear that a perennial shortage of labor will persist in this sector. That the new CEO and all of his arrogant attitude that caused even a board member.
Honorable member, again, we have a standing order with respect to accusations against persons who are not in here, who can't defend themselves. But as we are on this point, let me just say I've given you an extra minute because of the interruptions, but you'll need a 5-minute extension so that you could conclude. But before I ask the Honorable... Sorry. 30 minutes. You have 10 minutes more in the first 30. Yes. Let me just... I have allocated already the 1 minute and 30 seconds of interruptions on my part. Honorable member, you may continue.
Sugar has been dying since we lost that preferential treatment. Moreover, our workforce is not trained. Our workforce is not trained beyond substantially a cutlass and punt mentality. That is not what the next generation in the estates have been telling me that they want. They want to get jobs into the new sectors. And you want them to have this cutlass and punt mentality so that you can always bamboozle them and confuffle them. Mr. Speaker, we are always going to have, and especially with climate change, we are always going to have problems with that sugar industry. It's management, no workforce, Gawood having strikes all the time, and you must now appreciate the transformational decision that was made to right-size that sector. In relation to rice, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that I am happy to hear $300 million to promote research and development to improve yields and to ensure alternatives to insecticides to control that paddy bug. I come from the rice industry originally, and I know a little about it. But in relation to this livestock and poultry, I dare say that I have seen a paradox here that I found in the statistics, which Mr. Zulfikar provided. We see an increase in livestock production and poultry production, but we see a reduction of milk and eggs. I hope that the minister must, is not a reason for that. Or whatever the reason for it, there must be major interventions for milk and eggs. Mr. Speaker, we have also fisheries, cage fishing, it's called now, cage fishing, brackish water shrimp farms, and all of that. Mr. Speaker, we must also do an analysis as to why all these fish sectors has gone into a decline. Mr. Speaker, we had a report that came out recently in which it is saying that it could very well be what honorable member was saying yesterday, so much environmental hazardous stuff being poured into the ocean. But you don't want to do an analysis as to that and to speak the truth to the people in the fisherfolk community. However, you're going to take how much billion? 1 billion to give the 7,500 fisherfolk cash grants. That's not how you're going to solve the fishing industry's problem. Mr. Speaker, these are what are non-starters in relation to what is called aspects of the agriculture policy. Forestry, you have indicated, Mr. Speaker, there are lots that could be done other than just handing out cash transfers. You should have gone and taken on Mr. Vince Adams to tell the Exxon people what they must not do. What they must not do. And that is, don't throw the water with the oil inside of the ocean. That is one of the reasons. But you don't want that. Now you're proposing and they want to dispose. You're proposing and they want to dispose. What do you think about the cash grants? Cash grants in relation to $349 million for this cage, fishing, and brackish water. Mr. Speaker, why don't you tell us who and who will be the beneficiaries of this cage fishing and the brackish water shrimping? Mr. Speaker, you're allowing them to interrupt all the time, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, they are always, Mr. Speaker, when you are going to do all of that kind of cash grants, 589 to 6,991 farmers, it is not going to go well with anybody. And especially when, as against another community, you do not raise the wages and salaries, especially of public servants. The other community, you know what I'm talking about. It is important that you now understand that some money should be put in there. Mr. Speaker, I want to indicate that the security sector is in disarray today. With the little that we had, the security sector, under which came the police, fire, and prison and Kanu, much was done. Under local funding, under the Citizens Security Strengthening, under the British Security Sector Reform Report, which the PPP was so afraid of and scared of. They didn't want the British security reform at all. We have done plenty. And I am happy that in view of this paradigm shift of lots more monies in the revenue stream, that we must see Mr. Ben and his team, honorable member, continue the good works that we had started. Crime has gone up to the stratosphere. Execution-style murders, almost a weekly event. Domestic violence, robbers, choke and rob. On the videos, you could see it happening. And even cutlass and gun firing at the President's State House. It is terrible. And of course, the advisories from the various countries indicating that you got to be real careful when you come to Ghana. Last year, the minister had a lot to say of what was not done by the APNU AFC coalition. He will speak after me in this debate, but I want to just remind him of the very many things that we did. Mr. Speaker, we have strengthened patrol management and the use of data and analytics in policing. We have promoted a culture of nonviolence in those years, improving and appropriating money for public spaces. We have fostered socio-economic insertion activities for at-risk youth. We do not see that happening now. We restructured the Office of Professional Responsibility. We also had commenced and was going ahead with the Ghana Forensic Laboratory, and we understand that this is continuing. But what we have now, Mr. Speaker, is but an extreme levels of crime, and it would appear that all those consultancies that we had in relation to Mr. Russell Coombe and the British security sector reform have been shelved. Mr. Speaker, we had continued to ensure that we had close collaboration with the Caribbean Development Bank and the various institutions, CONSLE and RSS, and so many. Mr. Speaker, we had done a huge set of work in relation to rehabilitating and building new police stations and all of that. And at-risk youths, as I just mentioned. The TechVox school education was also done with the assistance of the Citizen Security Strengthening Program. So, you know, when they come here and say nothing was done, with the little that we had, lots were done. Lots were done.
For you to do more, honorable member, you will have to get a 5 minutes extension now.
Comrade Speaker, I move that the honourable member be given 5 minutes undisturbed to conclude his presentation.
Could you define this undisturbed 5 minutes for me? Honorable member, you may continue for the next 5 minutes towards your conclusion.
One of the important aspects was also ensuring that we had scrutiny and transparency in the security sector. And it is pursuant to Article 119D of the Constitution, we are supposed to have what is called the Parliamentary Oversight Committee on the security sector. You know, since the start of this parliament, we have not had any meetings of that Parliamentary Oversight Committee. Mr. Speaker, when inside of our administration, I have the Hansard of the meetings. All the members of the various discipline services forces have been called there and cross-examined by Mr. Gill, Mr. Rohi, Mr. Berry Ramsaran, and also Mr. Hamilton. Hamilton was there, but you don't have it now. You don't have it now. Hansard will show Mr. Gentle being cross-examined, Silal Fasad being cross-examined, and also Courtney Samuels being cross-examined. What do we have today? That is why I'm saying that we have a governance structure in Guyana, the governance structure in Guyana that wants to avoid and evade and eschew. This is called our security sector from whatever. This was 2017 and 2016, yes. And in 2018, Mr. Gill asked that we go into the interior areas. We had to find from this committee monies to go take them to check on police stations all across the country. Today, they have made that thing dysfunctional. So we can't ask Mr. Hicken anything We can't ask the heads and the deputy heads anything at all. And that is why today, that is a violation of our Constitution and our standing orders. And Gail, Mr. Honorable Member, knows about all of that. Mr. Speaker, I just want to conclude by stating it is important that we take cognizance of what we had done in relation to preparing and planning for what is called this security sector. We had Mr. Russell Coombe and the British High Commission dealing with the work and a consultancy on maritime security and safety. It was a preparatory work for purposes of ensuring when the oil and gas stream comes on board, what it is that we have to do. And they did a magnificent piece of work in relation to threat assessments and all. The current threats at that point in time, around 2019, is the Venezuelan hostile action. They were talking about present and near future. Cyber attack targeting government department or agency. Mr. Speaker, significant fire, explosion, or other industrial incident at the shore bases and maritime facilities. Cyber attack targeting poor facility. And even they mentioned here projected threats, civil protests due to perceived unfair distribution of oil and gas revenues, as we are seeing today. Civil protests due to perceived unfair distribution of oil and gas. Mr. Speaker, what we're going to have is a tremendous amount of resentment and disaffection, as they said, if this is not seen to be distributed equitably. And they are going to make sure, and then what they did was make sure that this must be done in accordance to avoid any security threats. But you know what, Mr. Speaker? They don't want to acknowledge that kind of planning and preparatory work. We now see them today avoiding all of that. I understand that Mr. Russell Coombe had come back, and I am certain that he would have given them the reports. But they have not, in this budget at least, tried to knit that kind of security projections into what is called a budgetary arrangement so that we can spend wisely for those projected threats. Mr. Speaker, with all of these that I have just spoken about, the preambular remarks on sugar and rice and all of that, it is important to understand you really cannot support this budget. You really cannot. It has all the hallmarks of that which is ensuring a disproportionate distribution of our oil and gas funding, oil and gas monies. And we are waging now a serious psychological battle as to the resentments that will be coming. We are in an explosive situation. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for allowing me to make these points.